When Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett challenged President Trump's G7 behavior live on national television, the studio fell still. No rally, no protest, just a quiet Sunday political roundtable, the kind where guests pretend civility while waiting for someone else to slip. Crockett wasn't even the featured guest, but within 3 minutes, she'd taken over, dressed in a powder blue blazer, calm and focused. She sat to the left of host Barry Diller. His tone was smooth, scripted. "Congresswoman, your thoughts on President Trump's G7 remarks, especially his demand that Canada lift energy tariffs?" Crockett didn't blink. "What I saw," she said evenly, "was a man treating global diplomacy like a real estate seminar in Boca Raton." A chuckle slipped from one analyst. Barry darted his eyes. Was she joking? She wasn't. Canada didn't fold. They just reminded the world how diplomacy works when ego isn't driving the car. Boom. Silence. Someone tried to pivot to oil prices. Crockett leaned in. "You can bark orders at the G7 table, but if no one moves, you're just talking to yourself. And Canada? They brought earplugs." Barry tried to laugh, but his voice cracked. Within 12 minutes of broadcast, the clip was viral. Within 2 hours, it was on late-night comedy. But this wasn't just a viral moment, it was a shift in tone. Viewers weren't just amused. They felt something. Finally, one woman wrote, "Someone saying it plain." A retired Navy vet posted, "Didn't vote for her, but I'd follow her into a firefight." A Pittsburgh teacher read the quote on TikTok, ending with, "That's what courage sounds like." Back in Texas, Crockett's team stared at the screen, stunned. "Oh God," whispered aide Laurel Mencken. "She really said it." But there was no panic, just awe. The White House wasn't so inspired. Within an hour, Trump's campaign called Crockett a desperate mouthpiece on Truth Social. Right-wing media echoed, "Crockett insults G7 diplomacy." But the attacks fell flat. Moderate voters weren't looking for safe answers. They wanted truth, even if it stung. Crockett hadn't shouted. She hadn't insulted. She just told it straight, and America was listening. But while Crockett trended online, a deeper story was already unfolding. Days earlier, thousands of miles away, the G7 summit inside Stauffentenach was unraveling. Tensions ran high. Trump had arrived with demands etched in stone: roll back Canadian tariffs, support his fossil fuel proposal, denounce climate subsidies as outdated. Canada's new Prime Minister, François Tremblay, had expected friction but not fire. Behind closed doors, Trump slammed the table and pointed across it. "You want U.S. investment in your pipelines. You play ball." Tremblay didn't flinch. "Mr. President, we trade in dollars, but we govern with values." It never made the transcripts, but aides spread the quote like gospel. Germany's finance minister smirked. France's delegate leaned back, quietly impressed. The tone had shifted. Trump pressed harder. Joint tariffs, backing for deregulation. But Europe pushed back. Britain's PM asked, "Is this a climate summit or an auction?" Tremblay met privately with Germany, France, and Italy. The result, a joint statement reaffirming the Paris Agreement and condemning aggressive political pressure. It posted to Canada's official site before Trump's team left the building. The U.S. media scrambled. The White House issued a cold response. The president remains committed to strong trade partnerships, but the optics were brutal. Trump looked boxed out, dismissed. Leaked footage showed Tremblay sipping whiskey, laughing with other leaders after the final session. Captioned across social media, "Cooler heads prevail." Inside the White House, advisors scrambled. They attacked. Europe blamed Canada, accused everyone of undermining American growth. But even Republican strategists admitted it. Trump had overreached. By the time Crockett spoke, the scene was already set. A president isolated abroad, allies resisting, a narrative falling apart. And now, a congresswoman from South Dallas had put words to what people were already feeling. But in her Dallas office, tension was building. Staffers showed up early, stayed late. Half the media requests were from networks hoping to bait her. The rest wanted to anoint her a progressive hero. Crockett stood at the window, arms crossed. "I didn't run for attention," she said quietly. "I ran to represent." Laurel walked in, laptop in hand. CBS Sunday, Live, Global segment. Crockett didn't turn. "Am I the only one who won't pretend Trump didn't get benched?" Laurel sighed. "Go too soft, you look scared. Too hard, and they'll say you're auditioning for a podcast." From the corner, Marcel Diaz-Young, new, careful, spoke up. "Or you say what everyone's thinking, and for once, the headlines don't get to rewrite the truth." That landed. We're not doing this for headlines, Crockett said. But we're not going to whisper either. Laurel nodded. No personal shots. Keep it clean. Crockett arched a brow. You've heard me speak, right? They laughed, tension still there, but trust deeper. In the next room, they huddled over quotes and polling numbers showing independents turning against Trump's foreign policy. Talking points were built. Stick to facts. Emphasize alliances over ego. Don't insult. Halfway through the third bullet, Crockett cut in. If I'm going on TV, I'm not repeating DC. Talking points. I'll say what we saw: a man trying to bully countries into smiling. A pause. Laurel leaned in. You sure you're ready for the blowback? Crockett didn't hesitate. They can drag me through every podcast in Alabama. This isn't about me. Marcel exhaled. Then let's get makeup. It was happening. They had less than 24 hours. Laurel stayed up half the night, juggling texts from producers and background checkers. Jasmine, seated at her desk, reviewed the latest G7 coverage. Scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad between bites of cold empanadas someone had dropped off around midnight. By dawn, the office looked more like a crisis newsroom, coffee cups stacked like scaffolding, phones buzzing against tabletops, staffers pacing the hall, whispering last-minute rebuttals just in case something went sideways. Jasmine sat quietly, earbuds in, listening to Nina Simone. That was her ritual. Find the ground. Stay human. But just before heading out, she stopped at her assistant's desk. Do we have anything more dangerous than a blazer? The assistant blinked. You want to wear? I want to look like I'm not scared of a single man in a single suit. They found a textured navy jacket, clean, sharp, not flashy. A movable. As she walked out, Laurel whispered, stick to the plan. Jasmine shot back a glance. I heard it. I just might revise it. No one could have predicted what would come next. How a 3-minute segment would derail everything the White House thought it controlled. Studio lights always burned hotter than they looked. Jasmine had done this before, but this time, something felt different. As the mic was clipped to her lapel and the countdown began, she knew. This wasn't about optics. This was about truth. 3, 2, the red light blinked. Showtime. Barry Diller opened with his usual blend of calm authority, the voice of a man who made a career pretending neutrality. We're joined now by Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Congresswoman, thanks for being with us. She smiled. Thank you for having me. Barry went straight in. The G7 didn't go the way President Trump hoped. Canada issued a statement rejecting his trade proposals. EU leaders voiced similar concerns. What's your take? That was the moment. Most politicians would hedge, defer, compliment the allies, nod toward negotiations, and duck. Jasmine didn't. What I saw, she said evenly, was a man trying to negotiate global diplomacy like it was a real estate seminar in Boca Raton. A beat passed. Barry's brow twitched. Care to elaborate? He walked into a room expecting applause. When he didn't get it, he started throwing threats like confetti. That's not leadership. That's ego. Barry shifted in his chair. One panelist glanced nervously at their notes. In Canada's case, Barry pressed, their prime minister's been praised for standing firm. Canada didn't fold, Jasmine said. They reminded the world what diplomacy looks like when ego isn't in the driver's seat. One guest nodded, trying to hide it. Another leaned in. Barry tried to stay neutral. Some might call that a bold way to describe a sitting president. Jasmine shrugged. You can bark orders at a G7 table, but if no one moves, you're just talking to yourself. And from what we saw, Canada brought earplugs. The control room froze. One panelist cleared their throat. The producer reportedly mouthed, did she just? But Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She just folded her hands and waited for the next question, measured, poised, direct. Barry scrambled to pivot. Polling numbers, committee updates, upcoming legislation. But it was too late. The moment had already left the studio. When the segment cut to commercial, the panel was silent. Barry leaned in off mic. That wasn't what we expected. Jasmine smiled softly. Maybe you should have asked better questions. She thanked the staff and walked out. Outside, Laurel stood waiting, phone buzzing. We're everywhere, she said. Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. Somebody subtitled it in 3 languages already. Jasmine slid into the car without a word. She didn't need confirmation. She could feel it. Back in the studio, producers debated replaying the clip in the next hour. One host suggested bringing on a White House representative. Another floated turning it into a full debate. But no one could explain why it hit so hard. Maybe it was because she hadn't shouted, hadn't postured, hadn't performed. She'd just said the truth like the weather. Calm, familiar, inarguable. And people noticed Dot in a diner outside Sioux Falls. A waitress replayed the quote for a customer. Did she really say that? He laughed. Twice, she said, grinning. Dot in Portland, a high school teacher paused a civics class. This, he said, is what happens when you don't read from the same script. Back in Dallas, the phones didn't stop ringing. Emails poured in, some angry, many grateful, a few simply stunned. Jasmine read one aloud. For the first time in years, I heard a politician talk like a real person. I don't agree with everything you stand for, but I respect the hell out of that. Marcel scrolled through hashtags. Hashtag say it like Jasmine. Hashtag Crockett clapback Canada broody apples. Half of Twitter thinks you're political bonk, he said, only half joking. The buzz wasn't just online. The local NBC affiliate wanted a reaction segment from her district. NPR called. CNN. Even a German comedy show. Laurel rubbed her temples. We can't overexpose. Talk too much and the moment loses weight. Jasmine nodded. Let it breathe. But in Washington, the temperature was rising. That afternoon, Press Secretary Ellen Reeves gave a tight-lipped briefing. The president remains committed to strong international partnerships, he said. This administration won't be distracted by petty sound bites, no names, but the tone was unmistakable. Later that evening, Trump posted on Truth Social. Low IQ, loudmouth Congresswoman from Texas thinks she knows diplomacy. She couldn't negotiate a parking ticket. Sad. Deleted 20 minutes later, but not before it went viral. Inside the West Wing, chaos brewed. Some staffers wanted to ignore her, afraid any attention would boost her further. Others demanded a media blitz, op-eds, surrogates, even attack ads in her district. Right-wing talking points rolled out. Disrespectful, unprofessional, just another loud Democrat. But even some Republican strategists admitted privately, the backlash was weak. She hadn't cursed. She hadn't lied. She hadn't even gotten personal. She'd just said it. And millions agreed. By nightfall, her line was everywhere. ESPN anchors referenced it between playoff clips. A rapper quoted her in a freestyle. A professor in Michigan published an op-ed titled Crockett and the Art of Saying What We Know. But inside her Dallas apartment, it was quiet. Jasmine sat barefoot at the kitchen table, a half-finished glass of ginger tea beside her. Her phone was on silent. Across from her, Laurel scrolled through offers. You've got 5 podcast invites, 2 from overseas. One might be a German sketch show. Jasmine chuckled. Tell them I'm flattered, but no. Laurel looked up. You're turning everything down? Just for tonight, Jasmine said. I'm tired, and I don't want this to be about me. I want people to remember what was said, not just who said it. Outside, a few cars passed. Headlights slid across the windows. Jasmine leaned back, arms behind her head. Tomorrow's gonna be worse. Laurel didn't argue. But before morning came, someone unexpected would weigh in and everything would tilt in a direction no one, not even Jasmine, could have predicted. At 8 o'clock am sharp, the White House wasn't just irritated, it was mobilizing. Chief of Staff Leonard Vance walked into the Roosevelt room with a folder in hand, thin and heavy with intent. Inside, a list of media allies and talking points in bold. He tossed it on the table. Get ahead of this. Kill the momentum. Overnight, Trump's inner circle had dissected the Crockett clip not for flaws, but for leverage. They parsed her tone, posture, word choices. They weren't looking to disprove her, they were preparing to reframe her. She's dangerous, said Deputy Comes Director Miles Bray. Not because she lied, but because she didn't. And she didn't flinch. Vance nodded. We're not burying this. We're drowning it. By midday, the campaign to drown her voice had begun. Commentators aligned with the administration went live with synchronized precision. On Patriot News, a segment labeled her words reckless and anti-American. Another host accused her of embarrassing the country by siding with a foreign leader over her own president. In Florida, a talk radio voice thundered. She doesn't speak for America, she speaks for the radical fringe. It was coordinated, loud, calculated, and it didn't stop there. A letter began circulating quietly through Capitol Hill, authored by senior Republicans. It condemned recent remarks by elected officials that undercut the dignity of the presidency on the global stage. No names, but everyone knew who it was aimed at. Back in Dallas, Crockett's team tracked it all. Every headline, every hit piece, every effort to paint her as disrespectful and divisive. Marcel tossed his phone onto the table. Fox just ran with, Crockett, the Congresswoman who mocked America. They're isolating her, Laurel said, eyes glued to her screen, trying to make her the issue, not what she actually said. Jasmine didn't speak. She was reading an email from a veteran in Spokane who thanked her for finally cutting through the noise. She looked up. Good. Let them focus on me. They can't defend the facts. But the pushback wasn't done. That afternoon, at a White House press briefing, a reporter asked directly about her remarks. Press Secretary Alan Reeves didn't blink. The president respects the role of Congress, he said, measured. But those who choose to insult him on national television may find themselves less effective in future negotiations. There were audible gasps, no clarification, just a threat. Cloaked in bureaucratic calm. In D.C., the statement landed like a warning shot. Senior Democrats grew uneasy. Some publicly distanced themselves. Others, especially those in tough districts, stayed quiet, waiting to see where the chips would fall. Just like that, the story began to shift. It wasn't about the G7 anymore, or Trump's failed diplomacy. It was about her tone, her audacity, her delivery. Cable panels debated if she'd gone too far. Morning shows framed her as a symbol of division. The focus moved from what was said to how it was said. But out in the real world, in barber shops in Cincinnati, diners in Omaha, coffee shops in Albuquerque, people weren't all buying the spin. Some found it disrespectful. Others called it necessary. Through it all, Jasmine said nothing. No press conference, no tweet, no spin. She let the moment breathe, just as Laurel said they would. And it came with a cost, pressure mounting, allies silent, enemies loud, party leadership unreachable. That evening, Marcel entered her office, tension radiating. There's talk of pulling your committee seat. Jasmine didn't flinch. Figures. Laurel hovered near the door, phone still in hand. You sure you don't want to respond? Jasmine finally looked up. If I start defending the truth, they'll act like it needed defending. I said what I said. My only regret is that it needed to be said at all. Then the phone rang. Blocked number. Laurel almost ignored it. Probably another angry voicemail. But something in her gut said answer it. Laurel Mencken, office of Congresswoman Crockett. There was a pause. Then a calm, gravel-toned voice. Put her on. Senator Alden Roth would like to speak directly. Laurel's eyes widened. She mouthed, "It's Roth." Jasmine blinked. She hadn't heard from Senator Roth in 2 years. Alden Roth, the 3-term independent from Vermont, soft-spoken, rarely seen on TV, respected by both parties, feared by neither. In an era of noise, Roth's quiet carried weight. Jasmine picked up. "Senator, Congresswoman," he said, voice steady. "I watched your segment twice, and I'll tell you something I haven't said to a colleague in a long time. You didn't just speak. You held the line." She stayed silent, unsure where he was headed. "You're going to take hits," he continued. "They'll attack your tone, your timing, your phrasing. Don't confuse that with failure. That's fear, their fear." "I appreciate that," Jasmine said, "but the pressure's real. They're painting this as a tantrum instead of truth. I know. That's why I'm calling." She heard him shuffle papers. "I'm issuing a statement this afternoon. No names, but it'll reaffirm that any member of Congress has the right to critique the executive without threat of retaliation. 2 others are signing with me. Maybe more." Jasmine leaned back in her chair. "You don't have to do that." "I don't," Roth said, "but I should." When the call ended, Laurel stared at her in disbelief. "He's really backing you." "He is," Jasmine said quietly, and publicly enough. By 3:00 p.m., Roth's statement was on every major political site. In a constitutional democracy, elected officials must remain free to challenge executive authority when they believe it serves the public good. Silencing critique, especially when voiced with reason and clarity, is a move toward erosion, not unity. It wasn't fiery. It wasn't flashy. But it landed. By nightfall, 2 more senators had joined. 1 Democrat, 1 independent. Their support gave the statement reach in places Jasmine alone couldn't touch, and the narrative began to shift, slowly, subtly. Now it wasn't just about tone. It was about precedent. If Crockett could be punished for speaking truthfully, who else would be next? Even centrist pundits took notice. A headline in the Minneapolis Ledger read, "When the truth makes people uncomfortable, don't blame the messenger." Online, the response sharpened. A video essay from a young analyst in Seattle called Jasmine's remarks the most human moment in politics all year. But Jasmine didn't gloat. No victory lap. No tweets. No interviews. She met with her staff, went over local housing initiatives, prepped for a committee hearing on veterans' healthcare. The work didn't stop just because the cameras had, but something had shifted. Days before, she'd felt boxed in. Now for the first time since the interview there was shared ground. Not safe, but no longer solitary. Calls from party leadership, the ones that had gone unanswered, started coming back. Polite, measured, full of talk about moving forward and open communication. Laurel was the first to call it. They're not mad anymore, she said. They're careful. Jasmine nodded. They realized it resonated, but just as things began to settle, a bigger storm was already brewing. Not on social media, not on TV, in the halls of Congress itself, and Jasmine was about to be pulled into a moment that demanded more than just a soundbite. 2 days later, she sat quietly in the back row of a packed House chamber, hands folded, eyes forward. The air buzzed, staffers whispering, lawmakers shifting in their seats, tension coiled tight beneath formality. An emergency hearing had been called under the vague label of executive oversight, but everyone in that chamber knew the truth. This wasn't a review. This was a reckoning. And as the room settled, Jasmine's phone buzzed, a message from Roth. Watch the floor. There's a moment coming. She didn't know what Roth meant by a moment coming, but she stayed ready. The first hour of the hearing dragged carefully choreographed testimonies from administration-aligned advisors praising the president's vision, warning about foreign influence, and layering every sentence with scripted gravitas. Then something broke the script. Representative Alton Reeves, usually moderate, usually quiet, cleared his throat. Mr. Chair, I'd like to request Congresswoman Crockett be added to the list of questioners. Heads turned. The committee chair hesitated. Is this a formal request? It is, Reeves said, flat. No one expected it. But the chair relented. Congresswoman Crockett, you have 5 minutes. Jasmine didn't rise immediately. She let the moment breathe. Then, calm and deliberate, she walked to the microphone, papers in hand, but unread. I'd like to thank the committee for the time, she began, voice low but firm. And I'll start with something simple. In the last 72 hours, I've been called every name you can imagine: reckless, disrespectful, unpatriotic. She paused, eyes scanning across the aisle. But no one's challenged what I said, only how I said it. A stir rippled through the room. I spoke on live television about the president's conduct at the G7. I said it looked more like bullying than diplomacy. I wasn't met with counterpoints, I was met with insults and vague threats. Not from the public, from power. The room tensed. I didn't come here to start fires, she continued. I came because I believe leadership without accountability becomes something else entirely. An official from the administration shifted in his seat. And let's be clear, if our allies are questioning our direction, the answer isn't to silence critique, it's to listen. Some members across the aisle leaned back, suddenly uncertain. This hearing isn't about national security, she said. It's about saving face. It's about turning a moment into a weapon because it disrupted the narrative. But truth doesn't care about narrative. She let the silence hold. I'd rather be called loud than remembered as silent in the face of something wrong. Not a single word interrupted her. The red light never flashed. When she finished, the chairman nodded, surprised perhaps, but respectful. Thank you, Congresswoman. Outside the chamber, a press corps that had nearly skipped the hearing scrambled to reposition cameras. Reporters texted producers. Clips were uploaded before Jasmine even returned to her seat, and inside, something shifted. Reeves passed her a folded note. Sometimes the fire doesn't need to be started. It just needs air. By evening, her full remarks aired on 3 major networks, uncut, unfiltered. A veteran in El Paso wrote, "That's what I fought for, the right to question power without fear." A college student in Ann Arbor called it the first honest 5 minutes on the Hill this year. Behind closed doors, leadership noticed. Within 48 hours, momentum behind the energy bill stalled. A quiet memo circulated. It was under reevaluation. Jasmine didn't celebrate. No interviews, no tweets. She returned to her work: housing proposals, school board meetings, district visits. She let the people carry the moment, and they did. No mass marches, no hashtags trending for days, just a wave, quiet, personal, and undeniable. Letters, postcards, videos. In Raleigh, a retired nurse filmed herself reading Jasmine's remarks aloud in her kitchen. Her voice cracked on the final line, "We need more of this, not less." In Phoenix, community college students held a teach-in called Truth and Tone, quoting Jasmine's G7 line to open the session. A student stood up and said, "For the first time, I felt like someone was speaking with me, not at me." Even conservative radio hosts debated whether Congress had forgotten what real speech sounded like. Across the country, clarity not ideology was resonating. In Milwaukee, a local bookstore created a window display titled Voices Worth Hearing. The centerpiece was her quote, "You can bark orders at a G7 table, but if no one moves, you're just talking to yourself." Back in Dallas, her office overflowed, not with outrage but gratitude. Dozens, then hundreds, then more. A 10-year-old girl in Kansas sent a handwritten postcard. "When I grow up, I want to tell the truth like you." Even Laurel, who'd seen cycles come and go, was stunned. "I thought it'd fizzle," she admitted. A viral clip, a news cycle, and done. It didn't fizzle, Jasmine said. It rooted. Still, she remained grounded, declined major interviews, met with housing advocates, took photos with students, never once brought up the clip, because she didn't think the moment belonged to her anymore. It belonged to the people who felt seen, heard for once, spoken with, and Washington noticed. Lawmakers who'd stayed silent began to speak. A group of progressives introduced a resolution affirming the right to critique the executive across party lines. It passed with rare bipartisan support. Even the White House backed down. No more threats. No more online jabs. When asked about the segment, the president shrugged. "She's allowed to speak. We're focused on our work." It wasn't an apology, but it was a retreat. One afternoon, Jasmine walked into her usual barbershop. The TV was on, tuned to cable news, but nobody was watching. A barber gave her a nod. "Still can't believe. They thought you wouldn't say it." She smiled. "They didn't think I'd say it that way." He chuckled. "You said it like you were one of us." That line followed her home. Later that night, she opened a video a friend had sent footage from a small-town elementary school in Oregon. Kids were holding a mock town hall. One little girl, maybe 10, stood at the podium and quoted Jasmine's G7 line. Her classmates cheered like it was the Super Bowl. Jasmine laughed, soft and stunned, then closed the laptop. Not everything had changed. Power still played its games, but something had cracked. People didn't want spectacle anymore. They wanted someone who didn't flinch, someone who spoke plainly, someone who didn't wait for permission. She stepped outside with a glass of water and a yellow notepad. No staff, no spotlight, just the faint hum of a sleeping city and the distant rhythm of cars. She scribbled 3 words at the top: clarity, courage, consequence. Tomorrow, she'd be back to work fighting for broadband access, clinic funding, education equity, not building a brand, just doing the job. But this moment stuck not because of attention, but because of who had responded. A steel worker, a teacher, a kid in Kansas. They didn't want perfection. They wanted someone who sounded like them. That was what broke through. Not a clever line, not a viral moment, just truth unpolished, human, familiar. She thought of all the hearings where colleagues talked in circles to avoid saying what everyone saw. The fear, the calculation, the self-preservation, and she thought, no more. She wouldn't dim her voice to fit someone else's comfort, wouldn't reshape her tone to survive the room. If it cost her something, fine. She hadn't come to Congress to keep a seat warm. She texted Laurel, "Let's hold a town hall. No press, just people." Laurel replied instantly, "Already working on it." The movement didn't need a star. It needed someone who showed up, not as a celebrity, as a servant. And the irony, her biggest moment came from doing exactly what her constituents always asked: tell the truth. That was the real message. Speak plainly. Hold the line. Let the system catch up. And if you're wondering whether it's worth it to say what needs saying, Jasmine had just one answer: yes. Because once the truth is out there, spoken out loud, in full view, something in the room changes. Even if, just a little, someone hears it, someone repeats it, someone builds on it, and maybe, just maybe, that's how it starts to matter.